Hoppy History, a podcast about beer, history, and people. Hop on board with us as we crack a few beers and talk about all the great history.
Welcome to Hoppy History, a podcast about beer history. If you do like our content, please be sure to subscribe and certainly don't hesitate to like our YouTube page and stick around for a beer as we go. I'm David Schellenberg. Joining us again is Paul Meek from Kichisippi. Hello, Paul.
Hello, David.
Beautiful June day in Ottawa. Perfect time to talk about beer and the history of beer.
Lots to be happy about. Beer, sunny days. It's a great day.
Yeah. Now, Paul, you run a microbrewery called Kichisippi, and a lot of what we want to talk about today is the history of craft beers in Ontario, a little Quebec, and certainly the craft beers in Ottawa itself. So let's start with you and your brewery. What's the story here?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for quite a while. So I've worked for the Alexander Keith Brewery out in Halifax. I've worked for the Sleeman Brewery in Guelph. I've worked for Smirnoff. I've worked for Pepsi. So I had a lot of experience, and I was selling other people's beers to restaurants, and people were saying, "Hey, Paul, we like dealing with your company, but we're getting more requests for local product."
Right.
And so this is back in 2009, 2010. So I was like, "Hey, let's look around to see if there's a brewery that we can represent." Is what we would normally do. And weren't really keen on something that fit what we were looking for in our portfolio. And it's like, hey, let's do something crazy. Let's start a brewery.
What?
And yeah, sounds like a great idea. And then we realized we're about $1 million short to open our own brewery.
I was just thinking, how much money did you lose?
Just a little bit short. Just a bit outside.
Right.
And so then we approached a small brewery called Heritage and said, hey, can you make a beer for us? And that was, we sold our first beer April 29th, 2010. And then 8 months later bought them out.
Right.
They were looking to get out. We were within 8 months. We were outselling them after being a 10-year-old company because we knew how to sell beer.
Right.
That was our expertise. I didn't know how to run a brewery, so we quickly learned how to run a brewery. I made some mistakes.
Wash some bottles.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was a lot of the unsexy side of it in terms of like logistics and shipping and boxes and trays and caps and the kind of things that you just think they're just going to show up on their own. So, yeah, so we sold our first keg of beer April 29th, 2010, bought the brewery out from Heritage December 2010. If I could give somebody advice, I would never buy a brewery 10 days before Christmas. Not a good idea. Exactly. Let's close this deal on December 15th. Okay, that sounds like, let's go with that.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a mistake, but we made the best of it. And yeah, so that was the thing. Back then, there was two brewing entities in Ottawa. There was the Clock Tower Brew Pub that had been brewing since 1996, making some fantastic ales. Yeah. And then ourselves. So we were at a food and beverage show in the fall of 2010. Yeah. Basically, our slogan was craft beer in Ottawa, and the customers were like, craft beer in a brewery in Ottawa? That's crazy. Yeah. What are you talking about? That doesn't happen here.
I have fuzzy memories of being at that. I'm pretty sure I was there, and I'm pretty sure I met you at that point in 2010. It went, wow, this is really interesting. And you think about it now, there are so many craft breweries all over the place. But in the early 2000s, it was really rare.
It was very rare. Yeah. So we're by no means, we're the oldest proper brewery in Ottawa. Clock Tower has been brewing since 1996. The Scotch Irish Brewery existed out of Fitzroy Harbour. The Heritage Brewery existed out of Ottawa. Old Hart Brewery out of Carleton Place. So there were some breweries that had come and gone before us. But now there is I think we're well into the 24, even not higher in Ottawa proper. Mm-hmm. If you get outside of Ottawa in terms of the National Capital Region, a lot more breweries as well. So it's a much different landscape than it was when we started 13 years ago.
And what happened? Like at one point, I would like to think all beers were craft beers.
At some point they were. Yeah.
If you go back hundreds of years, I mean that there wouldn't have been the conglomerates, these world dominating corporations that exist today, and a lot of that could have just been logistics at the time. Was you as a pub or a restaurant or a town made your own beer because it was tough to ship it to another town?
Yeah, exactly. Every brewery was a small brewery at one point. I remember it was meeting with our national lobby group. Beer Canada had a great conversation with Andrew Molson, great grandson of
Molson. I know
exactly. It was a really great conversation. It was really neat to see how interested he was in our small business. And when I told him back in the 2010 2012 that we were selling to over 250 bars and restaurants in the Ottawa area, he couldn't believe it. And he said at some point he goes, we were your size, we were that small. And he says, and we were doing the same thing you were doing. We were delivering beer ourselves in trucks. back in 2010, I was delivering beer in my wife's wheelchair accessible minivan. Like we were that small. We had 2 cell phones.
Right.
One was the actual cell phone. One was, we called it the office phone. So we looked like we were really big and professional. But you did what you could do. But yeah, as you said, Labatt was a small independent brewery at some point. Sleeman, Molson. I always joke that I could never be a big brewer because it was John Sleeman, John Labatt, and John Molson. But my name's not John, so I was never going to get that big. Had the wrong name to meet that legacy. But
John and Paul. Huh?
Exactly. Yeah. Now we're getting into the others.
Yeah, I know. There's a whole bunch of jokes there. And then I'm a David, so go figure on that one.
Exactly. Got very biblical all of a sudden.
Yeah, I know. Who would it do? Well, monks and beers have to be a topic for a different podcast.
We could definitely get into the Belgian side of things later on.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. But what happened that there was a demand for craft brewery? Now they do seem really common, and it's fairly easy to find. But 2000s, there was something along there. Did this start in the United States, where all of a sudden it was a thing?
Yeah, so we definitely saw a lot more. The microbrewery and the small craft brewery in the U.S. was much more prominent. I remember being 19, 20 years old at the time. You go down to, New Hampshire, basically all through New England, New Hampshire and Maine, and New England in general. And there was, you'd go to that beer and you'd go to that town and you'd have that beer. Yeah. It was much more prominent than you saw in Ontario, even in Canada. Now out west, British Columbia was much more prominent, and we were like, okay, why was British Columbia so much more prominent for craft breweries compared to, central Ontario? And the real reason was it was just too expensive to ship beer all the way over there. Like, if I'm going to ship beer to British Columbia, you have to put it on a train and go across the whole country, or have to go through the Panama Canal and get around. So you saw it sounds crazy.
That's a long trip. Yeah.
It's a long trip. So microbreweries were much more prominent in BC, purely out of demand. There just wasn't a lot of choice. So there was a lot of small breweries that popped up there. Right. Where in Ontario, it's easy to ship things in and out of Ontario, thanks to the St. Lawrence River. So we didn't see a huge demand on that because there was a lot of beer coming in from out of province and out of country. And yeah, you're right. So things did change a lot. There were some great craft breweries, in Toronto area. Your Amsterdams and your Great Lakes and your Brick Brewing from years ago that have been around for what would be now 30 years. That started out as brew pubs, became breweries. But Ottawa had that, that echo effect. It was sort of like this last bastion in terms of why things didn't happen here. Right. And Ottawa's got a unique history, and we don't have a major manufacturing sector. There wasn't this, factory town that was left over from the war. So there wasn't, there's not a lot of people that are 3-4 generations of Ottawans, right? Like
we're a lumberjack town.
We're a lumberjack town, but even that, like that's not even 200 years ago. Like it's still a very young town and growing in terms of its personality. So you didn't have this people. It wasn't multiple generations and. A long history in terms of brewing and manufacturing and agriculture and things like that. It's still very young and immature to a certain extent in terms of what's been happening in this great city.
Okay, so talking about Ottawa itself, I guess it's time for the beer break to talk about the beer
Best
that we
part
are
of the show.
The beer break. Brought to you by Kichisippi. Okay, and the beer break is, what are we drinking, Paul?
We are drinking some Kichisippi 1855.
Okay.
And 1855, the number itself is literally the year that Ottawa was born. Right. So Ottawa was born on January 1st, 1855. Before that, it was known as Bytown, named after Colonel By from the military from years and years ago. Yeah. So Kichisippi literally means the Great River. Kitcha is great and Sippi is river. And Kichisippi is named after the Ottawa River, which was known as the Great River by the Algonquin First Nations people. And so when Ottawa became Ottawa, back on January 1st, 1855, we thought that was a great way, having a beer named after the year it was born was a nice way to give a salute to some great people in the city that have been supporting us for all this time.
Oh yeah, and a great trivia question. Else too. Yeah,
absolutely. When we had our first anniversary party, which we talked about, you were at. The two questions we got was, hey, will you open a brew pub someday, and will you make a dark beer? Right. And I said, I barely know how to run a brewery. I don't know how to run a restaurant. So we'll go with the dark beer choice if I can, behind my door number 1, please, Alex. But it was making a nice dark beer that was sessionable and easy drinking was a great choice for us 12 years ago.
Yep. So 1855, the year that Ottawa was created, but brewing in Ottawa has been around for quite a while, and there is some legendary. I don't know if it's if it's a myth or true, but these beer tunnels that apparently existed once in Ottawa.
Yeah, so it's the beer tunnel is true. So the area we now know as Le Breton Flats.
Yeah.
Le Breton Flats is where the breweries were located back then. So the most famous would be the Brading's Brewery, and yes, there literally was a tunnel that would ship beer from one part of the factory to another part of the factory. And there's, my understanding is there either was one of the trains or one of the cars left over, and I'm not sure if it's been extracted out, but it was a very famous time and a very wonderful time in terms of manufacturing in this city. We actually have one of the old Brading Brewery crates at our brewery now,
Right.
That I managed to pick up on Amazon on a whim, just for some nice brewing history. Yeah, so Ottawa's had a great history. Here, but it's one of those things. People said, "Oh, you're in the brewing business. Everybody loves beer. You can just sit home and count your money." But it's not that simple. It's not that easy.
Right.
We've talked about all these breweries that have come and gone, and it's a very, I think, a bit of a fragile time right now. We want to make sure that these great breweries that are in Ottawa, we want to make sure that people are supporting them. And people always say to me, "Look, do you get upset when another brewery opens? Does it affect your business?" Well, yes, it's going to affect my business, but it doesn't make me upset as long as they're making great beer. I'm happy.
Yeah.
Because if they're making great beer, then more people are going to get into the craft beer pie. And if we can get more people drinking craft beer, then we can all win. I'd rather fight over my slice of a really large pie than fight over my slice of a very small pie. So yeah, if you're coming into the craft beer industry in Ottawa and in Ontario, and you're making fantastic beer, that's only going to help my business
Absolutely.
and my industry in the end.
So when you launched the brewery, how many beers did you have at the beginning?
We had one beer. So we made a beer called Kichisippi Natural Blonde.
Yeah.
It's a nice pale ale. I'll be very honest when I say we were heavily inspired by McCausland's Pale Ale out of Montreal. Fantastic beer. And we wanted to make a beer that, again, we talked in one of our other episodes about having a food-friendly beer. We wanted to have some beer with a little bit of hop to it, a little bit of characteristic to it. So that was our first beer we launched in 2010. And then for our first anniversary, we gave ourselves a birthday present, which was Kichisippi 1855. For the first 2 years of our existence, we only had 2 beers.
Right. And how many do you have now?
Currently, right now, if you go on the website, I think we've got 11 right now on the website. Yeah. We have 4 beers that we make consistently, and then seasonally we're bringing stuff in and out.
And as you have found with customers over the years, and I guess specifically seasonally, are tastes changing? Have you seen certain beers rise in popularity and fall in popularity over that time?
Definitely, yeah. Tastes are changing, and what we're still finding is the industry is still trying to find its way. Like you wouldn't come to Ontario, you wouldn't be in Ontario and say, "Oh, when I'm in Ontario, this is the kind of beer I drink. This is an Ontario beer."
Yeah.
We've talked about. I'm very familiar with the West Coast IPAs.
Yeah.
Your New England style IPAs. British porter.
East Coast IPAs. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. That beer itself there hasn't totally found its way, right? In terms of it's still very young. That beer was inspired by the Alchemist Brewery in Vermont, which made this hazy, grassy, almost prickly. With the hops would be grabbing on your tongue.
Yeah.
But in terms of British porters, Russian imperial stouts, Mexican cervezas, Ontario doesn't have its own flavor, doesn't have its own taste, if you will. So we're still trying to find our way. But in general, yeah, what we're finding is people's tastes are evolving, people's tastes are changing. If you were to say, okay, Paul, you have to drill it down to only make 2 beers all the time, all day, every day, it's going to be a crisp lager, and it's going to be an IPA.
Yeah.
Which
That's what's selling.
Right, that's what we're selling. We're finding that there's some polarization there in terms of I want crisp and easy drinking and refreshing, or I want there's a lot going on in the glass. And, very different in alcohol, very different in flavor, very different style. One's an ale, one's a lager. And so there's the whole, hey, I want to sit down and have my golf course beer, my lawnmower beer, have 4 or 5 beers, what we call a session beer. Other people I want, there's much flavor and there's much going on. I want to literally rip the enamel off my teeth with these hops and flavor and bitterness.
Yep.
Which the customer is excited about. It's not, I don't love it in terms of, it's funny because we have one of our beers called Hell or High Water,
Yeah.
and it's a fantastic beer. But if you go on the beer review websites, an easy drinking lager is never going to get the best reviews versus a huge IPA or
No,
or
you have to have a taste for it.
Right. But what's interesting is it's not the most exciting beer style on the planet. But and this is where I have to get on my soapbox a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a poached egg. So when you're watching a cooking show, see, it sounds funny, right?
Yes.
But when you're watching a cooking show and they say, okay, how are we going to test out to see if a chef can actually be a good chef? What they do is they give you a single egg.
Right.
What can you do with an egg? So when you make a poached egg and you make it really, really well, it's amazing.
Right.
But it's really easy to screw it up. But it's not always exciting, right? But it's so for making a
Well, it's also exactly the same. A poached egg tastes exactly the same no matter where you are in the world.
Right.
I suppose slight variations on the chicken and the amount of salt in the water, but
but
otherwise it's going to be very similar.
But it's clean and it's delicate and it's fluffy and it's beautiful. But it's not super exciting. So a crisp clean lager does the same thing. Making an IPA with tons of hops, it's not that difficult. It's interesting, but it's really not that difficult. So it's one of those. Okay, I'm making a big IPA and I'm using these 3 hops. And another time I'm making these 3 hops.
It did feel like a couple of years ago we hit peak IPA, where we had double IPAs and triple IPAs, and the objective appeared to be the biggest gut punch that a brewer could make, and guys loved that for a couple of months, and then it seemed to go over very quickly.
Well, that's the thing. Our friends at Muskoka Brewery, they've had a wonderful, I think, 25-year existence now in Ontario. Yeah. They were the lead on that with Mad Tom. Right?
Yes.
So Mad Tom came out, and all of a sudden, Mad Tom wasn't enough. Okay, we'll give you double Mad Tom.
Yeah.
So it was just that whole how much can I hit you over the head with a bucket of hops?
And it must have sold.
It sold. It did really well, right? And then what you saw afterwards is, okay, let's pull it way back.
Right.
And then they came out with Detour, which was a session IPA, which is basically you're still getting the flavor of IPA, the hops of IPA, but with less alcohol. So you're not, after 3 beers, you're not polluted.
Yeah.
But again, because people's taste changed, right? Like it was very it's a massive evolution. So, we're nowhere close to being, I'm in a British pub drinking a bitter, or I'm on walking the streets of Prague drinking a Czech Pils. Ontario's nowhere close to finding its way, and it may never be that way because it is such an eclectic, diverse, multicultural province that it's we're not talking about a 2-year-old history of the food that we eat and the drinks that we consume. So I'm not sure if it will ever get that way.
Is it possible to make an all Ontario beer?
Yep.
Do you the ingredients that you use? It always feels like a lot of the staples come from here, but you always import something from somewhere on the other side of the world.
No, we can do hops, malt, yeast, water, all from Ontario.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. Yeah, not a problem. I think the thing you're seeing is that to try and agree on, okay, let's make what's this thing we're going to be and what are we going to call it? I think that would be the biggest thing in terms of coming to an agreement on that. But yes, a lot of our malt that we buy is from Almonte, Ontario. Yeah. We get beautiful yeast out of Niagara, so that is not a problem at all. Yeah, that's the easy part.
And so here in Ottawa, we straddle Ontario and Quebec, and one of the remarkable things is you say there's sort of no particular taste like it in the Ottawa area, but I noticed distinct differences between the craft brewers, the microbreweries in Ontario, and just go a kilometer into Quebec and find a craft brewery, and it's completely different.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely different taste, completely different profile. What we find on the Quebec side is there's more French, Belgian, Flemish influences. You're seeing a lot of Belgian wits. You're seeing a lot of Blanche. You're seeing a lot of higher alcohol stuff. So it's less about very much reduction in terms of the lagers consumed. Very high in terms of your Belgian and your French.
Cloudy something or other. Yeah.
Right, and that's what. So it's a very good point. So that's the interesting part there is, if I serve you a crisp, clean, German lager or a Czech Pilsner, you get it. But if I serve you a Belgian wit that's cloudy, some people will be like, I don't get it. I can't see through my beer. It's scaring me.
Right.
And my response is, you drink orange juice and you don't get too upset about it. So, but it sounds funny. But but it's there's certain people that are just like, why can't I see through my beer?
Yeah.
And you have to explain that to them. And it's like the whole that beautiful unfiltered, wheat and the proteins in there. His flavor and aroma, and you're getting clove and orange and coriander, and there's beautiful things going on. But you're probably not going to drink 6 of them. Because that's not the point. The point is you're going to sit down with one of these lovely beers and have mussels and fries or moule frite. I apologize for my butchering of the French language. I apologize to all of my French friends. That's I shouldn't have tried that, but yeah. So it's
mussels and fries is a classic working man food. Like it is, and it's funny when that shows up on a menu and you try to convince the boys to get, hey, let's get some mussels and fries, and they all sort of look at you and you think, no,
yeah, exactly.
This is what we would have eaten
for sure. But the response is, don't you mean chicken wings? Right?
Yeah.
Don't you mean chicken wings and a picture of of North American lager?
Yeah.
So the cuisine is very different. The culture is very different, and not a shock that the beer styles are very different. So we talked about our friends at Sleeman earlier that have been brewing some wonderful beers for 30 or so years in Ontario. They bought out Unibrew years ago. So we're talking about some wonderful beers, Blanche de Chambly and Le Fin de Monde and some fantastic Belgian style beers
that have been around for 30 years.
Been around for 30 years, but none of them are below 6% alcohol. So again, you're not going to sit and have it's not your golf course beer, it's not your lawnmower beer,
right?
But it's a beer that's got massive flavor and aromas and beautiful food pairing opportunities. So yeah, it's incredible how different the taste profiles are. Where I could sit in one patio on one side of the river, you could sit on the patio on the other side of the river. We can wait each other. And I'm drinking chicken wings and lager, and you're having, as you say, mussels and beautiful
and fries
Belgian wit.
Yeah,
it's incredibly different.
And so, since you launched your brewery, what's changed in Ottawa over those years?
Definitely. So back then, what's changed is I think the amount of breweries.
Yeah,
that's the biggest movement. Is that what was there's a brewery in Ottawa? Question in 2010. Mm-hmm. Now has become, I want a local beer. Like I remember when we first launched, we would go to the liquor stores, the LCBO stores, and our Natural Blonde beer was the only, at the time, so this is 2012, when Natural Blonde 6-packs were in the LCBO. Natural Blonde 6-packs was the only beer or wine or cider or anything made in the National Capital Region that was in the LCBO, which is crazy to believe. Mm-hmm. So we'd literally be like, dear liquor store manager, this beer is made, fill in the blank, kilometers from your liquor store. So I'd go into the Westboro store, the Stittsville store, the Orleans store, and fill in exactly how many kilometers so that people can, because when customers come in and say, what do you have that's local? Yeah. Oh, this beer is only made 6 kilometers or 4 kilometers or whatever from our liquor store. Well, that's awesome. You really defined local, because sometimes local and craft and independent and artisan get intertwined, but you really defined how local it was.
And like the only thing local like that point, because now we've got a couple of winemakers in town as well, some vineyards popping up. We tried with some spirits, but that didn't last very long in Ottawa. But
no, that's coming. So there's another resurgence on that. So you've seen, so there's some great people out in Perth, Ontario, Top Shelf, doing some distilling. North of 7, a very, very small distillery on Saint Laurent. Yeah. Just more front door.
Vodka, I guess, too.
Vodka, and so you're talking about a distillery that not only distills, but literally changed the game. Instead of saying we're going to distill from grains, we're distilling from milk byproduct.
Right.
So we're taking leftovers, fermenting it, distilling it, and then turning it into alcohol. So they had to get special legislation to be able to call it vodka.
Right. It's great in hot chocolate, by the way.
It's excellent in hot chocolate. They've got some lovely. They've done a really good job. So in Almont, where the distillery is, they've taken all the other wonderful producers in Almont and put it in with their stuff. So they make their own cream liqueur, so their own Baileys, if you will,
right,
without the Irish side. So they've got maple cream with Fulton's. They've got chocolate cream with Hummingbird, and then stumping myself, the coffee cream with Equator.
Yes.
It's fantastic stuff. Yeah, so Dunrobin Distilleries is making some wonderful stuff. Ogum out of Canada making some wonderful stuff. So you're really seeing a wonderful resurgence where the brewing was the big jump, back in the teens, the 2011s, 12s, 13s. Wineries, we've got some beautiful wineries in the area, and now distilling some, I would say, 5 or 6 really solid distillers in the area. So it's really, Ottawa's come around in terms of, we're seeing more producers, but I still think that the consumer is not necessarily going in saying, I want an Ottawa beer. So it's I still think we're seeing, I do think it's an opportunity for us to do more and us to sell more. Like when we look at, I always compare Ottawa to Nova Scotia. Like I went to University of Nova Scotia. My wife was from Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia is about 1 million people, and Ottawa is about the same size. So it's, even though it's a province versus a city, there is similar comparisons. So craft beer in Nova Scotia is about 35% of the sales.
Is it really?
Yeah, where craft beer in Ontario is only about 10.
Yeah, 35%.
Yeah. And it's a simple thing in terms of legislation, and craft beer is much higher in Quebec as well. because you're putting it in front of people. So whether you're in Nova Scotia, the liquor stores are littered with local product. When you're in Quebec, whether it's at the SAQ or the local dépanneur, littered with Quebec-made product. Here in Ontario, we're not getting the same support in terms of retail opportunities, whether it's at the beer store, whether it's at grocery stores, whether it's the potential of convenience stores. So what we've seen with the grocery store experiment, which has gone very well, is that if you give customers the craft beer opportunity on the shelf, they'll buy it.
Right.
So in grocery stores, we're closer to 20% because it's just there.
Yeah.
So it's working very well for the big goal.
Because beer stores are owned by a group of breweries that are not craft breweries, and
Correct.
is that part of it? They're just not terribly interested in it, because beer stores do carry Ontario local craft beers.
Right. So so if I wanted, it's one of these weird things. The the LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, does two things. They run a retail chain of stores, but they also control the flow into the province. So if I go to the LCBO and say, hey, I've got this great beer called 1855, can we put it in your liquor stores? Because I'm a small brewer, they'll say, yes, you can put it in our liquor stores, but you have to go ask every single store to bring it in. If I was a big brewer that had its massive, $100,000 marketing budget and billboards and ads and T-shirts and staff, exactly, then they would give you a head start. They'd say, okay, we'll put you in 150 of our best stores to give you a good head start, and then you go and feast for the rest. So for us to get 1855 into the liquor stores, step one, get in the system, be an approved product. And step two, hi, Mr. Stittsville manager, Mr. Canada manager, Nepean, Barhaven, Hinterberg, can you please bring our product in? With the beer store says yes to everything, but you got to pay them. So if you want 1855 in the system, $10,000. Then it's just in the system. And you want a store, $230 per store. Then you have to hit certain minimums. You have to make sure you're selling enough. So you could say, here's $10,000 up front to get in your system, then $230 to get in your store.
Right.
Then you're gonna have to hit your certain minimums, or they can say you're out. Well, I just paid all this money to
to get in.
Nope, you gotta sell this much. But most beer stores are set up to the biggest difference between the beer store system and the LCBO system is that when you go to the LCBO, you shop. When you go to the beer store, you buy. You don't tend to go to the beer store and I'm going to look around.
Yeah.
Most of them are, set up just to look at the wall, pick a sticker on the wall, and the beer comes flying out the back miraculously. Well, what the beer store did was they set up some self-serve stores, where basically you're walking through a large fridge.
Right.
But what they found was that the majority owners, most on the Bat and Slima, what they found in those self-serve stores was that their market share went down because people actually shopped instead of buy. So then they overcorrected it by saying we're going to set up these stores and we'll put our top 10 things that we sell in terms of massive poster in terms of here's the 10 we want you to buy.
You walk into those stores, there's always the big 10.
Right,
Yeah.
and here's the little ones that we have, but we don't really, it's not really a huge concern for us. Right. So those self-serve stores where you can actually walk through and shop, the craft brewers and small brewers do well in those stores because you're in front of the customer.
Right.
So it's two completely different systems. And with the grocery stores can do very well for craft brewers. The toughest challenge is to get that head purchaser at Loblaws to take your call.
Right.
As a small brewer, he's getting calls. He or she is getting calls from anybody. And the biggest craziness of the whole grocery store system is when a grocery store sells a can of beer, they're making 3% margin.
3%.
3%. So right now, if I sold a can of 1855, which is $3.05, tax and deposit in.
Right.
If you buy that at the brewery, if you buy it at the liquor store, you buy it at the beer store, you buy it at the grocery store, or what's called an agency store, it's the same price in the whole. That's one of the things. It has to be the same price in the whole province.
Right.
Doesn't matter the system, doesn't matter the city. Same price. Thunder Bay grocery store, London, Ontario liquor store, brewery in Ottawa, exact same price. The LCBO, I sell to the LCBO. The LCBO is taking their cut. Okay, but with the grocery store, the LCBO is still making their money. So for the independent grocer in Stittsville, Ontario, to say, hey, I want some 1855 on my shelf, they send an order to the LCBO. The LCBO sends the order to me. I then fulfill the order through the LCBO, send it to the grocery store. The LCBO gets 97%. The grocery store gets 3%.
Right.
So what you were seeing a lot of grocery stores are saying is like, I don't it's not that they don't care what's on the shelf, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter because they're taking it as I just want you in the door. I'm only making 3%. I'm hoping that when you come in and buy some beer or buy some wine, that you're going to pick up some other stuff while you're here because I'm just not making a lot.
Yes.
So
it's the one stop. It's the dream that we all want is be able to buy my steak and my beer and some chips at the same time.
We saw that in Nova Scotia years ago, which was they were selling milk at cost just to get you in. Come on in, get a bag of milk. Hopefully, you pick up some chips and whatever while you're here. So the grocery store system, craft brewers do well, but the decision makers with the grocery store system, are not in love with it because it's such a small margin. So, but again, they're smarter than I am. They're bigger companies than we are. They're looking at it as the bigger picture, right? Getting customers in the door.
I have seen beer disappearing from some of the grocery stores in Ottawa. So is that what happened? They just realized that shelf space was more valuable for something else?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So they tried.
They tried, and it's working. So that's the thing that the Ford government's working on now is looking at possibly putting beer into convenience stores.
Right.
And they're looking at what's best for the consumer, making it most convenient to the consumer. So what you're going to see is whether if the consumer wants to get beer, they're going to get beer. So whether they go to the liquor store, grocery store, convenience store, the brewery, it's not going to increase the sales of beer. It's just going to spread. It's going to make more shipping and logistics costs. We're happy to see beer in convenience stores, as we've said, like the rest of the world, like our friends in Quebec.
Yes.
What we'd like to do is make sure that there is certain things set up that the craft brewers are protected. So, like, again, when you go to a store in Quebec, when you go to a gas station in Quebec, I can get beer. But it's not just the massive brewers. They have a fantastic selection of single bottles and single cans from Quebec brewers. And if we're going to go into convenience stores in Ontario, we'd love to see that same kind of thing where you're getting a local product, because when you go into Circle K or Max, does Max Milk exist anymore? When you go to
does. It's not in our little corner of the world, but yes, Max is still.
I'm showing my age big time on that one. But when you go into the local convenience store, the last thing you're saying is, I'd like to pick up some artisan something or some local something or craft something. You don't go into a convenience store to get local fresh.
Right.
You go in there just to get something on the fly. Get something convenient. So we want to make sure that there's local products in that store, so that the local producers that have thousands of jobs and have hundreds of breweries in this province are being supported, and not just massive brewery 1, 2, 3, 4 on the shelf. We don't think that would be best for the consumer,
because that's the way literally the rest of the world does it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, there's always going to have your macro brands. There's always going to be somebody that wants to drink this massive, generic beer that's made in brewery, I don't know where.
Well, sometimes those are good for crushers at the cottage,
they have their place, right? Yeah. But in terms of if the government's looking at what's best for Ontario, then we think what's best for Ontario would be to make sure that the brewers of Ontario that keep the money in the province, are definitely going to be well served on the shelf in those stores.
Yeah, and that, sort of looking to the future there, I guess, is kind of a good way to start to wrap up this particular episode, because when you do look into the future, it does sort of feel inevitable. Like the days of the beer store and the LCBO are destined to change. I guess we just don't know it'll be 5 years, 10 years, or 100 years, but it can't last forever.
No, I think the beer store, it's easy to hate on the beer store.
Yeah.
I think the beer store has a massive opportunity to be a wonderful place. It can be as a lover of beer, it should be this wonderful destination where you can go in and you can learn and you can taste and you can have with different kegs and try a little sample of something. I think it could be a really great place to learn about beer. Really, it would be an absolute wonderful destination to go in and really learn about all these wonderful things about beer, and not just pick up the 2-4 with the T-shirt. The LCBO, you see the LCBO now. They're changing their business model. They used to own buildings. They're renting a lot more. They're trying to get out of the real estate game. They're trying to decrease their overhead. Breweries themselves. It's a lot of retail. People going into a brewery and buying beer. People going to a grocery store. And people buying beer online. Like I remember when we opened our brewery ourselves. Like the reason we relocated our brewery 4 years ago was that the rules had changed. Where you could go into a brewery and have what was called a sample of beer. So a sample of beer was up to 12 ounces or 341 mils. So that was considered
a good size sample.
That's a good size sample, exactly. Which would be a glass of beer. Then all of a sudden, the government said, well, it doesn't have to be a sample size. It can be a pint. It can be a pitcher. Oh, okay. Then all of a sudden, you can serve at 11. Well, now you can serve at 9 in the morning. So the landscape is changing. The model is changing. The way to connect with the customer is changing.
Right.
If you said to me 13 years ago that we could have a brewery that has, serving pitchers of beer, and beer would be in the grocery store. There's no way I could have predicted that. So the market will continue to change. The market will continue to catch up to the rest of the world to a certain extent in terms of just getting out of its own way and just not demonizing, alcohol as this enemy of society.
Well, and do you find there's challenges with getting craft beer into restaurants and bars as well?
Not necessarily. It is the easiest route to market for us. Like if I go into David's Bar and Grill, like David can make a change that day and put our beer on tap. But yes, in terms of why would he put my beer on versus another brewery, that becomes the challenge. If it was just that easy to say, hey, my amber's the best, I'd be sitting at home counting my money right now. So there's definitely a lot of competition. So then that's where in terms of we're seeing a lot of breweries making a lot of different beers. But there's not a these 150 restaurants, these 200 restaurants all have Brewery X's #1 lager, #1 IPA on tap. There's always this differentiation kind of thing where if you're in other parts of the world, like try to be in certain parts of New York and not find Brooklyn lager on tap. Try and be in certain parts of California and not find Stone Brewery on tap. Like it would be odd. And, go to Boston trying not to find a Sam Adams beer. It's crazy. So we're still.
I was thinking of Big Rock in Alberta.
Exactly, Big Rock in Alberta. So there's a fantastic example. Big Rock in Alberta is synonymous with the area. They open a brewery in Etobicoke, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect in terms of the brand. So people, when people say to us like, why are you trying to focus on Ottawa and not the rest of the province, the rest of the country? My wife, that was her thing. She said, I want to be part of the Ottawa experience. Like she was a proud Nova Scotia girl. And she said, look, when you're in Nova Scotia, Alexander Keith is part of the culture. And that's what we're trying to accomplish on the Kichisippi side of things is, hey, I'm at Ottawa for the weekend. I'm going to go to the Parliament buildings. I'm going to go to the canal and have a Kichisippi beer. So if we can be part of that, win in Ottawa thing, then we've accomplished our job. And I think that's where the youngness and the immaturity of the industry is still coming along in terms of being part of that local experience, whether it's Kichisippi in Ottawa or Great Lakes in Toronto or different, being in that town and having that beer as part of the local cuisine.
We have seen some craft breweries in Ottawa fail over the past couple of years. Like have we hit peak craft microbrewery in the city? I
think until legislation changes and until the taxation comes in line, until the government says, look, let's help you out a little bit, then I do think I don't think there's a need to open another brewery in Ottawa because anecdotally, every brewery in Ottawa is not at capacity. In other words, we're not brewing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right.
Every brewery in Ottawa could make more beer. But you're not seeing, because there's certain things that are in our way in terms of being able to fully maximize the potential.
Yeah.
But again, I go back to that Nova Scotia example. We're nowhere close to being at 35%, industry volume in terms of market share. So until we're getting closer to that, adding more breweries to this city, I don't think would be the best idea.
Yeah. Now you got to be still wondering about if all the breweries need to get together and come up with an Ottawa style. Yeah. I don't know, but take all your beers and mix it together and then and see what this tastes like.
Swamp water.
Yeah, see what it tastes like. We'll call it the Ottawa beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go river water. Here's some river water, just not on the Petrie Island side, more upstream, right? Exactly. But that's and there's the thing. Like it's one of those, compared to the wine industry. 30 years ago, Ontario wine didn't have a great name. It was just Ontario wine was just there.
Yeah.
But they got together. They created the VQA. It was about something. And Ontario wine has a lot more credibility now because they banded together and grew an industry. And it's still, I think there's an opportunity there, whether it's Ottawa or Ontario, to do better in terms of growing the industry, whether it's educating the customer, whether it's certain styles that we're going to focus on to make it part of that experience. I do think this is one of the crazy things everybody talks about. Again, a lot of Nova Scotia content, but Alexander Keith's India Pale Ale. Mm-hmm. It was probably an India Pale Ale, back when it came to be, but there's no legislation, there's no rules to say that they can't call it an India Pale Ale. I could call my beer Kichisippi Chardonnay, and there's not a thing you could do about it.
Right.
Where tequila is the agave plant from Mexico. Scotch is from Scotland, and champagne's from the particular region of France.
I guess ice wine has got
exactly. The ice wine has to have certain parameters. Even you can make Scotch whiskey in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, or you can make Scotch whiskey, in certain parts of Ontario, but you can't call it Scotch. You can just call it whiskey.
Right.
So this is where I think, in terms of, is there opportunity for again, certain legislative bodies to come in and say, here's the rules. And because as soon as there become standards and guidelines, then you take it more seriously.
Yep. Excellent. All right, Paul Meek, anything we've missed along the way?
I think I've been in my soapbox for like 20 minutes, so I'm going to step down now and we'll go back to another beer break. But no,
excellent.
This has been great.
Oh, yeah. So back to the beer break. So what are the tasting notes on this? We got sidetracked. A
little bit.
And I was going to go back to you on it, but when you were off on a good rant, and I sort of figured, all right.
And another thing.
Yeah.
Get off my porch, kids.
It's good, though. I learned quite a bit. Okay, so let's wrap this up just by talking about this beer for a moment then. So what do you get on this? What's the tasting notes on this
So
one?
the thing I love with the 1855 is it's, the amber ale is a misunderstood category. So whether you call this a red ale, whether you call this a nut brown ale, there's definitely some commonalities, but it's more
Nutty,
it's more
little chocolatey.
Exactly. There's some chocolate malts in there, definitely some nice chocolatey bitter notes. The thing I love best about this beer is trying to get people to unlearn certain things. So I always say to people, drink an 1855, drink it with your eyes closed, and convince me it's a dark beer, because people have this thing that dark is a flavor. Right? So people, dark is not a flavor, and as much as Coors Light tries to tell you, cold is not a flavor either. So exactly, but that's the thing. There's these certain myths that you have, right?
Yeah.
Like my favorite one is cold filtered. It's like I've never been to a brewery in my life that's hot filtered their beer ever. Like it's this thing.
It sounds good.
It sounds good, but it's nothing there. So I think this is where
the what is it? The Bavarian purity law.
that's a thing.
That one makes me laugh too. Like that sounds like washing your hands before you make beer.
Right. So the Bavarian Purity Law of 1516, or the Reinheitsgebot. So that was basically, the Germans saying beer can only have certain things.
Yes. But isn't this beer?
Right. But the Belgians were like, Bavarian Purity. What are you talking about? Let's throw some nuts and some fruit and some things in, and Bavarians are like, no. It was water, hops, and malt. Like the yeast was just a natural thing to them. So it was actually only 3 ingredients.
Right.
Water, hops, and malt. They didn't even count yeast as an ingredient. And the Bavarian Purity Act existed until the 1980s. Like, that was a law that existed for over 360 years.
Right.
Where the Belgians were the mad scientists of the world. And the Germans were more like, here's the box, and you stay in the box, or, it's just not beer.
Yeah.
So, again, that was their way of saying, we want to make sure that it's taken seriously. So it's
Anyway, back to the black.
Oh yeah, wow. Where's it? Like lefts and rights all day. Yeah. So 1855, it is a beautiful amber ale, nutty, malty, chocolatey notes to it, but it's a nice, easy drinking, refreshing beer that sort of shakes off that misnomer that dark beer is too heavy to enjoy.
Yep.
This is that session beer. We could sit down and have 3 or 4 of these and not be overwhelmed.
Right. And is that, you just pair this with a couch, or is there a particular food that goes along with it?
This is my campfire beer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it pairs with the campfire.
There you go.
Oh.
A little hot right now for a campfire, but
Oh no! But once the sun goes down,
there you go.
Yeah. No, you're right. This would be perfect.
We're gonna sing a song now.
When
the sun goes down.
Well, I'll save that for the next episode.
Nice.
Paul Meek from Kichisippi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, David.
I'm David Schellenberg. You've been watching Hoppy History.